Greetings, students. I'm Dr. Sadri, your instructor for this course. And what we're going to do today is we're going to focus on Chapter 6. And as you know, Chapter 6 is focusing on what? On the, realism school of thought. Okay. Considering that usually chapters focusing on theories and approaches have a tendency to be kind of challenging to understand, I thought your authors have done a pretty good job of what? Making understanding of this, school of thought, this particular school of thought, realism, what easier for you. As you notice, they did a pretty good job. They focused a little bit on the historical part of it. They started by talking about the general pessimistic perspective of realism. What you need to know about realism is really the oldest, approach we have to international relations. It goes all the way back to Aristotle. Is that right? I mean, I know that a lot of people, they give credit to the, modern, father of realism, Hans Morgenthau. Is that right? And to his book, Politics Among Nations. By the way, that was one, when I was a, undergraduate student, that was our book for what? Introduction to International Relations. And that has changed a whole lot because, as you can see, that book was presenting only one point of view, but your book is presenting many different perspectives that we're going to cover in the next few weeks. Okay, so having said that one, as I mentioned, they make it very easy. So they talk about the historical part. It goes again then talking about Aristotle and contribution, goes to Morgenthau. And then after that, they focus on what they consider to be the 6 major assumptions of what? Realism. Fine. Okay, let's go over that one. It's very clear. The chapter is clear about it. I put actually, PowerPoint, as you know, about this one as well. So I just read it for you. And then, as I mentioned, the text material is easy. What I'm going to do is first I'm going to cover what they say. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what are their biases. Is that right? Because I want you to have a comprehensive perspective, not to be captured by the perspective of only our author. Is that right? Or better to say authors, because there are 3 authors to this particular book. And then after that, I'm going to remind you about some of the material that I put for you in terms of what? In terms of realism. So if you notice, they were talking about the 6 major, assumption of realism based on their perspective are, in this order, in the same order. 1, man is wicked. I wouldn't call it man is wicked. I would say mankind is wicked. Maybe there are some men who are wicked. Is that right? I mean, Saddam Hussein was wicked. It was a man. Hitler was a man. It was wicked. But it doesn't mean all the men are wicked. Is that right? I think politically correct terminology would be mankind is wicked. Is that right? 2, state is the dominant actor. They really mean to say state is the dominant actor at international system or in the world. The third one is state system is based on respect for sovereignty. I think you already know that because I've emphasized this one in so many different ways, that what goes to the definition of a state is the notion of sovereignty, which basically is a nice French word that we use in English and we use it in political science literature. All it means is independence, which means this particular, government representing this particular state is not taking order from anybody else. Because if it would take order, it's not a state, it's a colony. Is that right? Next one is number 4 assumption, is the states seek to maximize their power. I think that's kind of understood. And I'm going to come back to this point when I mention, different perspective on the realism. Number 5 assumption they have right there is, in this system, is a self-help. In other words, you have to take care of yourself. It's like a cafeteria. You take your tray and you start taking whatever you want. Is that right? So it's a self-help system. Nobody's going to come by to help you. And then last but not least, major assumption they have is that world order is maintained by respect for a balance of power, which is another concept. Is that right? That they cover. And I thought they did a very good job. So I'm not going to go and repeat material in the text, which is very clear. Okay? What I'm going to do is after I finish with, reviewing what they said, I'm going to start presenting to you how does this realism fits. Okay? Then after these 6 major assumptions, then they go to the types of realism. So they introduce classical realism, which they did a pretty good job of covering it. Then they present neo-realism, Fine. Then after that, they go to subcategories of neorealism. In this case, they focus on what they call defensive neorealism and offensive neorealism. And then after that, they add one more category, which is English what? School. the English school. So after, offensive and defensive one, they add the English school, which, by the way, our three authors seem to subscribe to English school. They are a very good example of that. Okay, because I mean they do not come clearly say it, but as somebody who has been in the field and is a neutral person, and I don't have any particular alliance, what do you call it, favorite, better to say, approach or theory that I follow. From what they say here and there, I detected that this is what they're really subscribing to. And then last but not least, after that one, they say that the last four major category of the neorealism they cover. Remember the categories of neorealism. They started with defensive neorealism, then offensive neorealism, then the English school, and last but not least, new classical realism. Is that right? So this is what they have done. And more or less, they have done a pretty good job. Now, what I think was missing, and I thought really you need to have a general perspective, because I don't want you to be subscribing to one point, is this. Realism, going back to Aristotle, and even way before that, to be honest with you. Is that right? Because a lot of literature in our country is basically focused on what? Oh, the Greeks. Okay. Well, the Greeks were like around about 2,000, 2,500 years, is that right, ago? Were there any other civilization? Haven't we talked about the Egyptians? Have we talked about the Chinese? What haven't we talked about the Persian Empire? You see what I mean? So these are all empires that existed. I think one of the challenges we have in the literature of international relations, and we are hoping that your generation, you change it, those of you who are going to become professor, is this. If our books right now, they start basically with only Greek thinkers, we need to go beyond that. Where did the Greeks, they got their ideas? Many of the ideas was because of the interaction they had with Egyptians, with the Persians, and they had a little bit of an interaction sometimes with Far East countries, not too much. Is that right? Mostly was with the Persians and the Egyptians. Okay, so that would be kind of nice, because we are living in a world that we are talking about inclusivity. Is that right? We are trying to bring everybody together. We are not trying to separate people. Is that right? Or not to say one group of people are better than another group of people. Is that right? Or one group of people, they deserve all the blame and everybody else is supposed to attack them. No, we're trying to include everybody together. We are an immigrant country. Most of the people in our country, they came from somewhere else. The only really true Americans are Native Americans. Is that right? Because they were here when the Europeans came, and then the Europeans with themselves, they brought some people from Africa or some people from Asia or other parts of the world. Is that right? Okay. So for that reason, what I wanted to mention is realism, which is the oldest theory of IR, gets all of its ideas from the perspective of what? From perspective of the nature of mankind. It considered the nature of, and this goes back to Hobbes. Hobbes was considering that nature of mankind is not good. Okay, that's why he wrote the book Leviathan. All right? Okay, so what happened? It says, because mankind is not good, you need to watch it. And you need to learn how it functions, because it's based on that functioning that what? That we learn how to operate our domestic system and how to operate within international system, which is the community of states. And we talked about this one. In this community of states, there are roughly about 200 states. Okay? Fine. Not a problem. I think that sounds great. Okay. All right. Having said that one, if you remember in Module 0, when I brought up the whole idea of there are two schools of thought that you need to know about, interaction between, these groups of, scholars, I presented the realist school, and I presented what they call the idealists. Is that right? Now, if you remember, I mentioned some assumptions over there that I wanted to emphasize a little bit right now. Based on those assumptions that I mentioned, I said all the realists, they have their own opinions. You put two political scientists in any room, you come up with 5 different political parties, okay? Because sometimes political scientists, over time, guess what? They change their ideas. They think, oh, what I said before, oh, I learned something more, now I believe in something different. Fine, not a problem. All right, so here we go. Those 4 assumptions that I mentioned over there for you in Module 0, and right now, see, we can relate it back and forth, okay? Are here. Number 1, different states have different interests. Okay, that's what sometimes you hear it as national interest. Fine. Okay, which are often at odds with each other. Okay, this state wants that resource, let's say oil, The other states wants that too. Example, Iraq and Kuwait in late 1980s, is that right? And early 1990s, they had a disagreement about, Bubuyan Islands. And what was that? There was a lot of oil there, okay? And first Saddam Hussein said, well, this island is a part of the, map of Iraq. So it should be part of that. And the Kuwaitis, they said, no, this has been a part of our country. The dispute started over that. So started over what? Conflicting interests in this particular case, over conflicting interests over what? Oil. Okay? Of course, then later on it got much worse, because when Saddam noticed that, oh, these guys are not going to give it to him, is that right? Then he said, you know what, the whole state of Kuwait, according to some maps, is one of the, provinces of the traditional state of Iraq. It's our 19th province. So I'm going to take over Kuwait because it's a part of us. You see what I mean? So here we go. So conflicting interests. Next, contradictory interests could lead to a conflict. So sometimes you have the interest, like what we just mentioned. Is that right? You have a different perspective. You have different interests about that particular resource. If there is no solution, a peaceful solution, what happens? Conflict starts, which is exactly what happened between what? Iraq and Kuwait. Okay? So, of course, the highest level of conflict is what? War. You could have a dispute. You could have a conflict. But hopefully you try to process it through what we call peaceful, process of resolving this, conflict. Is that right? So in that regard, if it goes through that peaceful process, fine. If it doesn't go through conflict resolution and peaceful settlement of the dispute, process, peaceful settlement of dispute, then you end up with a war. When the diplomats, they stop talking, who starts talking? Generals. Is that right? The military. So then it ends up in a war. Then, in this case comes, assumption number 3. A state's power level is crucial factor in determining the outcome of what? Of conflict. Now, this is the traditional rule, that the more powerful you are, the more it is a chance for you to win this what? This war, okay? I can tell you that this hasn't worked always. Is that right? Okay. I mean, there are a number of examples. Right now, we see, for example, that Russia invaded what? Invaded Ukraine. Well, this is not the first time. The first time they invaded Ukraine was in 2014 when they took over what? The Crimea Peninsula. Okay? At that time, Ukraine was in a chaos and everything else, could not really defend itself. By the time they turned their head, Russia has already annexed it. And really, the international community kind of turned their head back, for convenience. Is that right? What are they going to do? Russia is so powerful. What is Ukraine? Who cares about this and that? Is that right? What happened? They did it again. In what? February 24th of 2022. This time they wanted the rest of Ukraine. Okay? And we are still in 2023 when we are making this recording. I'm making it right now in August 24th of 2023. It's still the situation. We are still in the middle of that war. Again, that was not the very first war that Russia had fought against a former Soviet republic. In 2008, they actually did this to Republic of Georgia, not our Georgia, Republic of Georgia in the Caucasus. Is that right? I wrote actually a book about Caucasus area. If you're interested, you're more than welcome to look at, go and look at it. Don't buy it. Always borrow it from a, library or something. You don't need to necessarily always buy a book, okay? So that's as far as what this is concerned. So we usually think that a powerful state is able to win. This is not necessarily the case. These are the things that I want to make sure that you guys know. Is that right? Here right now, Russia is having a big problem trying to win this war against Ukraine. One. How about, let's talk about us as Americans. Didn't we have a hard time in Vietnam to win against Vietnamese? We are much more powerful than Vietnamese. Is that right? That war dragged on and 58,000 body bags came back to the U.S. or in Vietnam War. My own Uncle Steve, was actually in that war. Why? He was a helicopter pilot. Okay, and so I know he used to tell us a lot of stories and things like that, and how they fought and what type of equipment they had and everything else. And he said that he was flying these really sophisticated helicopters and everything. And what they had to worry about, here in Vietnam was as they're going over the forest, they had to worry about these Viet Cong soldiers sitting on the top of a tree, is that right? With a one old-fashioned, maybe World War I gun, is that right? And then all they needed to do was shoot the pilot, and the whole, the whole, helicopter would fall down. Is that right? So we basically left that war from many perspectives. Is that right? They say that U.S. lost the Vietnam War. Okay, whatever. So it's not always guaranteed that a bigger state necessarily wins. We go to the human history, we see a lot of examples of that. All right. Can you think of an example? Think about it. All right. Last but not least, major assumption right here is that, according to what? Realist. Politics is all about maintaining power, increasing power, and projecting power. This is actually something that Morgenthau was very much fascinated with. Is that right? If he's a father of, basically, modern, realism, is that right? That's what he's famous for. So every state wants, first of all, to maintain the power level they have. If they have the opportunity, they like to increase their power level. If they have the opportunity, they like to project their power. Is that right? So, maintaining power, I'm sure you understand. No state wants to become weaker, militarily or economically. Is that right? When we were talking about militarily, we're talking about what? Hard power. When we are talking about economically or culturally, we're talking about what? Soft power. Of course, you could also understand easily the notion of a state wants to increase its power, wants to have more military power, wants to have more economic muscle, wants to have more influence culturally. Good? What about the last one? What about the projecting power? Okay, it's very simple. Projecting power means that it likes to show off. Don't we people do the same? Is that right? Like, for example, those of us who are getting really old, and instead of just being happy by driving, a Toyota Corolla or Honda Civic, they buy what? An orange-colored Lamborghini. Okay, what is car for? Car is basically for moving you from, place 1 to place 2. Place A to place B. Is that right? And if you're living in a city, as you're going from one distance to another one, you have to stop by any lights anyway. Is that right? How much of a difference does it make that if you're sitting in a Lamborghini, is that right? Or Porsche or whatever, and you can go 0 to 60 in about 3 seconds. By the way, how many of us can actually drive 60 miles an hour in a city limit? Is that right? You're lucky if you can do 25 to 30. All the traffic and everything else. You don't believe me? Think about I-4. Is that right? They keep adding everything to it and it keeps backing up. In the mornings, at nights, and it seems like it's 24/7 nowadays. Is that right? Because they keep expanding it and still we have a lot of what? We still have a lot of what? Traffic there. Okay. That's why I don't live in Orlando. I live in Titusville. In Titusville, when there are 2 cars in front of you, people, they think, oh my God, high traffic. All right. Enough about that. So, projecting power. How does projecting power help? So, this is not a Lamborghini you're showing. Projecting power for a state happens when what? When a state has an issue with another state, but instead of attacking that state, sends what? Aircraft carriers. How many times you've heard that when there is an issue here or there, we decide with some of our partners over there to organize some kind of military maneuver. Is that right? Or we send an aircraft carrier. Now, why should we send aircraft carrier? What's the most dangerous weapon we have? Our submarines. When you send a submarine, you mean business. Is that right? Because nobody can see it. And that submarine can use its position that nobody can see, is that right? And shoot the missiles and destroy whatever. But how could we impress people? Oh, in your water, you don't see, but there is the most vicious, military equipment we have, and that's going to be business. That's not going to scare anybody. But you send an aircraft carrier 4.5 football field, is that right? And an aircraft carrier doesn't go by itself. It has a task force. It has destroyers with itself. It has supply ships. It has little boats here and there. It has submarines behind to make sure that nobody is going to throw some kind of missiles or whatever, or torpedo or anything else against the aircraft carrier. That's impressive. People will start thinking, should I start messing around with US or not? You see, that's projecting power. All right. enough about those factors. I think you have a pretty good idea in terms of what realism is. I told you what the chapter is talking about. I told you a little bit about their little bias, and don't be disappointed. So, oh, wow, our book is biased. Guess what? I dare you to find any international relation book that doesn't have bias. Every single international relation book written by any IR professor, is that right, has some kind of bias. This was the best one I could find you. Is that right? The most recent one, because it just was published in April of this year. So that's why it has actually a little bit more updated information about the wars and everything else. All the other ones were 2020, 2021, before even the war started, or they came in 2022, but it was way before what the war started. So I want to make sure that you have the most recent what information. As usual, if you have any kind of question, you know what to do. You email me. Have a wonderful day. Bye.